So here's a secondary rant that I got for you. Most people that have been following me for a while are well aware that my parents died back in 05. Yeah, it was 05. And they died after being married 66 years. They died 6 months and 10 days apart. So this is the 15-year anniversary of their deaths. And one of the pieces when... Nightmare, where'd you go? Just sneaking around. Sorry about that. If somebody wants to know about my writing, usually the first PDF I'll send them is something I wrote called Remembering My Dad, which the last day of my dad's life was incredible. Only my father, who had managed to survive polio and still raised 11 kids in a modest one bathroom, 4-bedroom house. Only my dad could get anybody could get 2 of his kids, myself and one of my sisters, to actually laugh as he died. And I'm going to tell you the story real quick. The reason why I'm even bringing it up is, for some reason, death has been seeming to haunt me lately, and not in a bad way. It just... Well, that's what it is. I just passed my... I didn't even realize it. May 1st, which was this past Friday, was my 3-year death anniversary, and I totally freaking forgot about it. I had totally forgotten about it. That's amazing. Yep. Maybe that's why. See, the thing is, I'm no longer afraid of it. And you can't be afraid of death. And I guess between that and I got kind of addicted after subscribing to Hulu. I got kind of addicted to the show. I know this is going to sound bad, but it's a really good show. It's got great writing on it. And even though I normally don't like musicals, it portrayed them well. It's called Zoe's Amazing Playlist. And this the latest episode that aired Sunday night involved her dad dying, and brought up the question, his caretaker brought up the question, either death is a horrible, despicable, heinous thing, or it's a beautiful, spiritual escape from a body that no longer functions properly. And in my dad's case, it was the latter. And when I got to his house, I had been working as an air tech for an environmental management and compliance, ECMC. That's what out of Chittenango, New York. And I was working a demo job that day. I remember the day he died. I was working a demo job that day, and the day I had been assigned to it because a couple of days before that, my dad had taken a turn for the worse, and I got over there, and I think my idiot brother, I'm the youngest, by the way, so we're talking older. My next oldest is 8 years older. I believe he had come in and, for whatever idiot reason, decided to share a freaking shot or something, and my dad probably, in the process of, because I overheard him talking about it. I'm sure that's what happened, though. He probably shared a shot with him or some stupid idiot thing, and my dad ended up getting a lump on his head. Like, I'm talking easily a half-inch high lump that, at the time, I had been working EMS, and I was an emergency services personnel with a certified first responder with the Constantia, New York Fire Department. And so I took care of my dad's obvious wound that nobody seemed to notice. They were all talking to each other. My dad was sitting there in a freaking wheelchair hunched over. And when my dad saw me there, it was kind of cool because I distinctly remember I had this exercise thing I did with him where I would grab his opposite hands in mine, and that was our sign that it was me. And he understood that, and he would squeeze tight. And that last time, I got that one last squeeze from him. So with everybody coming in, I kind of bailed. And when I got back to my office, they kept me there for a couple of days, but then they had this assignment that wasn't too far from my parents' house, so I went to do this demo job. And when I got there, I had this, for lack of a better way of putting it, feeling of foreboding. And when I went home, for lunch, as I left, I told the I told the job boss, or whatever we want to call it, the job manager, that I probably wasn't going to be back because I just could feel it, and plus the signs from what had happened previous. And sure enough, when I got to my parents' house, I saw the condition my dad was in, and after contacting they had this I forget the name of it. There was a program, PACES, where the personal assisted civilian whatever. Anyway, where they sent a nurse out to your house every day, twice a day. When I called them up, it turned out that my dad had been taken off his meds. And I said, well, so how long does he have? A few days? And they said, more like hours. And I was like, wow. So I called up all my sisters right away, all my siblings, and said, look, if you're going to say goodbye, get your ass over here right now. When I knew my dad couldn't drink a beer, but I went into the fridge and I saw one beer left there, and I grabbed it, a glass, and about 2/3 of it I put into that glass and got a big old tablespoon. And as I'm walking into where my dad was sitting in a wheelchair, I encountered my next oldest sister, and she said, where do you think you're going with that? I looked at her square in the eyes. I said, I'm going to have a beer with my father. You got a problem with that? She backed right the fuck up and said, no, not at all. So I walked in and I started spoon feeding my dad. And about 7-8 spoonfuls in, I decided I'm going to toast my father. So I stopped, put the spoon in the glass, raised that beer up to, raised the bottle with about 1/3 left in it up in the air, and started to toast my father and saying, hey, thanks for being the greatest dad. And I barely got any of the words out when suddenly my dad did this shit with his hand. I don't know if you can see it. Like, he brought his hand up to his face, and like, first time he had voluntarily moved a muscle in like 3 days. And the idiot that you're listening to, my first thought was, he must want to tell me something. So I leaned in, and at this time I had a shaved head, and I was quite big. And so I leaned my big head in there to hear my dad's fateful final words, and my sister slapped me on the back of the head, and she said, you idiot, he wants more beer. So we both started laughing our asses off as I began to feed my father the rest of the entire bottle. And let me tell you, he sucked that. It was amazing. He sucked down every last drop of that beer. And then shortly after that, my sister left to take care of business. And my mom, this was the hardest thing for me about it. My mom told me to tell my father that it was okay. She understood. He could go now. And let me tell you something. There are a lot of things I've had to deal with other than explaining to my mother what I thought happened when you die. Having to tell my father, as he stood there staring at my mother in the most loving way you can imagine, that it was okay for him to go. Well, that's really all I got to say about that. Sorry for bringing you down. it's good to reflect on him in those moments.